This is Just Women, every Tuesday at 1 o'clock on Brooklands Radio.
I'm now joined in the studio by Sarah Zeigel, who is author of a new book, Coping with Autism. Hello, Sarah. Thanks very much for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Well, I've looked at your book and it looks as though there's an incredible amount of research that's gone into it.
I don't think it's that much research as learnt. It's what I learnt over many, many years. I've got 4 boys. They've all got classic autism. Classic being the non-verbal, no eye contact kind, the severe kind of autism, which gets diagnosed much younger, 2 or 3 years old. So, in fact, really the book was written mostly from my own experience. I didn't have to look very much up at all.
Really? Because it looked very impressive and a lot of references at the back and everything.
Yeah, well, the only thing I did have to research was epilepsy because very fortunately my boys don't have it. And the EHCP chapter was a bit complicated because statements have been changed and they're now called EHCPs and nobody really understands them very well.
Oh, what does that stand for?
Oh, Education and Healthcare Plan.
Oh, right, thank you.
Instead of a statement. So it combines the educational needs with the social care needs. But it's still being rolled out. I still don't have one for any of my 4 boys yet. So it's a bit more of a complicated system. It's meant to work better. But I didn't really understand it when I was writing the book, so that was one thing I did have to research.
Oh, right, okay. So, yes, as you said earlier, you're mother of 4 boys, and the 2 eldest, I believe, have just turned 18.
They were 18 2 weeks ago, which is lovely, except that they're now adults. And one of them thinks that being an adult means suddenly he can do everything that he wants to do. And he thinks he can travel independently, he should go off around the country, all sorts of things he's now campaigning to be able to do. But unfortunately, he's not quite able to yet. So it's quite a hard process for him to realise that actually overnight everything doesn't change except he can go to the pub.
Ah.
And he has done that once.
Oh, right. And how was that?
That was great because he's a runner. The running fraternity have been fantastic. They've been so supportive. So he goes to a local running group that's run in a shop in Sheen, and he's known them very well. And they were having a leavings drinks last week. So I said, fine, go to the pub with the boys and have a drink and come home afterwards. So he did.
That's marvellous. And I believe also you got an artist and a drummer.
Yes, he's the artist. His twin brother is a drummer. So next year they're hoping to go to college and do BTECs, one of them in art and design and one of them in drumming.
Very impressive.
But basically the book, the reason for the book was really also to just show how much you can do. Unfortunately, when children are diagnosed, paediatricians and other health professionals almost write them off and say there's not much you can do. They're
well,
autistic.
That's what happened to you, isn't
There's
it?
not much expectation. Well, you can do a bit of this. Well, you can do that. They don't really offer much support. And we found a system called ABA, which is Applied Behavioural Analysis, which is a one-to-one specialist system. And it's individualised to each child, and they learn at their rate, and they learn what they need to learn, and they learn everything. So they don't just learn how to read and write, say. I mean, speech is the first thing. If you can get speech, that's your most important thing. But if you couldn't get speech, then they teach them another communication system. But they teach everything, so it's social skills and going out and about in public and being able to handle noise and being able to handle the bustle of world. And that's equally as important as learning anything academic, because what's the point of academics if you then can't actually go out the house and enjoy the rest of your life?
So how does that work then? A tutor comes to the house?
Tutor comes to the house ours started very little at 3. So a tutor will come to the house and look after that child for a 3-hour session. And within it teach a whole list of things. It's quite a complicated system and they're quite highly trained, but they don't have to have a degree in it, but there are qualifications you can do. And they might be teaching them language initially. They might be teaching the behaviour. One of our boys, it's amazing now, the one that went to the pub independently, used to just lie on the floor, scream, tantrum for hours on end. For the first year of his programme, most of the time was screaming. He hardly had any language. The other one, who's a drummer, didn't speak at all until we started. So within 6 weeks, he started to make his first sounds.
Oh, how wonderful. Yes.
And now, I was saying to someone the other day that he wrote his own song at Christmas a couple of years ago, played piano by ear, wrote a song. And we didn't know he'd written this, and we had this Christmas big party for all our tutors and carers, and he just said, I'm going to play this song. And he
fantastic.
played the song and sang it. And this is a child who at 3.5 couldn't say a word.
That's remarkable, isn't it?
It is amazing. And you just want to say to people, look, there's so much you can do. You can do it, but it's hard.
Yes, because I noticed there was quite a big chapter on diagnosis.
Yes.
And how people can accept the diagnosis.
Well, people don't. You find people like grandparents. Sadly, sometimes within the family, you may find the father may not accept and the mother may. So the mother might be saying, right, we need to do this schooling, we need some speech, that we need to do this. And the father's saying, oh, it'll be all right. And the grandparents are saying, well, oh, come on, they're just a bit delayed, it'll all be all right soon. And oh, don't worry too much, you're just worrying about it, They'll all catch up. And they also, sometimes this word language delay is used. And delay means it's just a delay and they're going to go better. And that's not necessarily so. So, the terminology doesn't help as well.
Did you have these situations yourself with grandparents? And
yes, we did. Yes, I don't think any of ours ever accepted it or ever quite understood it. And I think, their perception was that our children were quite badly behaved.
Oh.
And
yes.
that, unfortunately, is quite common in the public. And they don't look different. Children with autism, you may pick them out if they're doing something very obvious and they're waving their hands or they're jumping up and down or doing some obvious, what we call a stim, then you might pick them out in public. But if they're not, people just think you've got a naughty, badly behaved child who won't stand in a queue and won't wait their turn and starts having a paddy because they can't wait.
Dear, oh dear, that's very difficult, isn't it?
So, really, I think that at least these days, autism is a bit more out there.
Yes.
In the public.
And
so
going back to the ABA, is
yes.
that very expensive?
Very expensive. We went to tribunal 3 times in order to get our local education authority to pay for it. Unfortunately, it is expensive. And if you don't have the wherewithal, that's a huge barrier. And there are campaigns in the country trying to get it as a more mainstream accepted therapy. There are a few schools. A lot of it is done on a one-to-one basis at home, and then your child, like ours all did, go to a mainstream primary school accompanied by their specially trained one-to-ones.
Oh, really? Is that how it works?
So they can be in mainstream that way.
Yes.
Rather than being in mainstream and perhaps being given an untrained LSA or someone who's not very aware of what they should be doing and has no backup. Where our therapists all had a supervisor every couple of weeks and a consultant who'd come in, and if there was a problem, then say, okay, try it this way, have all these methods to use. There's a lot of resources as well.
Yes, yes.
It's very, very intensive, but it works.
Well, yes, I mean, you're the living proof, yes.
Absolutely,
your boys, yes.
Yeah.
And is there a shortage of these tutors?
There's a shortage of tutors. There's a shortage of money to pay for the tutors, and there is a shortage of actual tutors themselves. They come and go. They may go off into something else as a career. They may just pop in for a few years. There's a few will stay and do their masters. But, yeah, finding tutors is quite difficult.
Anyway, getting back to the book, I noticed there was a chapter about coping emotionally with the diagnosis. How did you personally cope with it?
I think we coped with the twins diagnosis probably not too badly. It was a shock. I had no idea at all. So we were shocked. But I think they didn't change overnight. They were who they were still. So you've adjusted to how they are anyway. And then adding the diagnosis, it sort of makes sense. But it's a horrible diagnosis because it's a lifelong disability. So it's not a diagnosis of dyspraxia or verbal dyspraxia or something that's stopping them speaking. And you think, well, okay, we can do something with that. This is actually a lifelong diagnosis, and you look ahead to the future and you just despair. And that's what I'm trying to do, is not have people in that despair mode.
Yes, because
you do move on. You move on, but your children also move on.
Because you said that you could find nothing out there at all.
Well,
in the terms of a book.
Books-wise, I literally, the day they were diagnosed, I went to the library because I'm a book reader, straight to the library. And I picked up this book, and it was just really depressing, and said parents have unrealistic ideas for their children and that these children will ever work. And of course they won't. And I just put the book down. But the books can either be quite educational books at quite a high level, explaining sort of the brain or the concepts. And, when you're in a place where you've just had your child diagnosed, they're running around, you've got no time to yourself, they may be chaotic, they may be screaming, your life is really, really hard. You need some help, but you don't have the time to sit and read a sort of what I call like a school book. So what I wanted to do is give people the basis of an overview, but also talk about the emotions, because I don't think there are any books that are really talking about how you feel. And the idea with this is that hopefully people could give it to their mother-in-law, or perhaps the person who works with their child at school. So those people might have some insight into what the parent is going through. And the parent turns up at school and somebody says something negative and the mother bursts into tears. You know, they may not have slept all night. They may be absolutely shattered. You don't know what's going on behind that child. And people make judgments to the parents as well. And I think if we can let people know how it feels as a parent to have these children and what you're going through at the same time, perhaps people will be a bit more sympathetic and give you a bit more edge as well.
Sure, absolutely. Yes, and also there was another chapter about sensory issues. That was very interesting, because you talked about a child who wouldn't eat anything if it was touching another item on the plate.
Oh,
which was
the list of different things that children seem to have are endless. I've got four boys, and all four are different. So there isn't one thing you could say, oh, well, that's an autistic thing to do, or that isn't, because of all four of mine. They will all do different things. So one of mine would only eat pasta and bread.
Very challenging for you.
they just have certain, you know, we've got over all of those things now. We have moved on. But there are, you know, they like a particular cup, or they like a particular routine. Mine actually, the boys' table manners still aren't great. They're still a bit, as well as the autism, you often have other comorbidities, we call them. So 2 of my boys have got ADHD as well, which means they're very impulsive. They don't think and they don't care. And even though they're quite verbal now, they just say what they want to as well, and they just do things. And that gets them into trouble. And people, again, think they're badly behaved, but they don't have any stop mechanism to think. They've got a degree of dyspraxia. So, as I was saying about the table manners, then they don't eat very well. They don't look very polite when they're eating with their knives and forks. We don't have dyslexia. I'm not sure what the incidence of dyslexia is. I don't think it's as high, but children with ADHD is quite high. And anxiety. One of my boys is very anxious as well. And sort of almost OCD with the anxiety.
Oh dear.
And it all kind of wraps up together. So it's just this big, endless diagnosis that can cover everything at the moment, it seems.
So, and how on earth did you find time to write this book?
Well, I used to write the odd hour, literally an hour at a time.
Oh, I see.
So it would be, where it came from was that after a while people realised I'd at that time got 3-4 children, all with autism, so people wanted to talk to me. And I kept getting phone calls, and a mother would be on the phone pouring her heart out for an hour. How do I do this? How do I do that? And then a week later, how do I get this benefit? How do I do that? And I was thinking, I have no time, and I've spent an hour that I didn't have with one person. It's just not enough. So I thought, okay, if I get an odd hour, whenever I get an odd hour, I'll write it. I'll write what I would talk about, and that way get out to, you know, hundreds, thousands of people rather than just one at a time.
But that's fantastic, though, to have written this book. I mean, because it's not very easy writing a whole book.
Well, it isn't. I'm halfway through the next one.
Oh my god! Oh, congratulations!
I can't stop
fantastic.
now.
What's the second one going to be about?
Well, the second one will be a memoir, because I found from the book that what people really like in the book is the anecdotes. They like the personal stories. They like the stories of how it was, how it is now. That's sort of the message of hope. And how we've moved on and how things do move on. And you need that. When you're in that horrible dark space, you need to know, you need to look ahead. When my middle son was diagnosed, my older boys were only 5 and really quite severe still. And I despaired because I just could see what I'd got ahead. And I just, you know, that was my worst time, I think. By the time my 4th little boy was diagnosed at 2, the older boys had all moved on and were talking and were doing quite well. And I wasn't as despairing because I could see his older brothers ahead and think, okay, it's hard now, but I know in another 5 years it won't be. And I saw that, and that gave me much more strength. And that's what I want to do for other people.
Yes, well, that's what comes across from these books, is the message of hope. And how have you managed to remain so positive?
Well, you are, because they move on and you see them do things. And you see that if you do something, you get something back. And that everything you teach them, they learn and they move ahead. And they learn to learn as well. So once they start to learn and once they start to get the idea of language, then that increases as well. Also, with all my 4 boys, this myth that autistic children don't like affection is just, they are so affectionate. They're so loving. They thank me all the time. We've been out for a day. It's thank you, Mum. We had a great day. Well, that's really good.
Oh, how nice.
I mean, they're so positive themselves.
Yes.
And the fact that they love everything they do, and they're so positive. Like the one that wants to run, he wants to run in the Olympics. And, he ran a big race last year and he won a schools race. And he's been trying for 5 years. And this sort of determination. And he won it. And you think, how can you not do everything for these children to see your child achieve something like that?
That's fantastic,
all,
yes. And how about travelling? How does that work?
Travelling these days isn't so bad. We don't go very far. We have been on a plane now, but we didn't for a long time. We only drove places in the car, always. I've never taken them on a long train journey.
You must have a very big car, I'm thinking.
We have got a big car. At one point we had three in buggies, so we had to have a big car anyway. They don't like it in the car too long. They get very bored. But these days, of course, it's much easier. You've got iPods and iPads and things, and they can sit and fiddle.
Sure.
In the old days, it was quite hard because they had nothing to do and they'd get very bored. So that was harder. And just travelling generally or just going out and about was hard because they would run across the road. And you've got 3 of them and they could all run across the road.
Oh, my goodness gracious.
Total hazard out.
Yes.
So that was always really hard as little ones. But now, of course, now they can cross the road. And it's all those things that move on and get better.
Yes. And how has your husband adjusted?
He's brilliant. I mean, he works full time. So I suppose I've had the brunt of it. But when he comes home, he's great with the boys. He's really good. He's always been really acceptant of how they are as well. He never rails, why me, why us, ever, which I find admirable. He's always in a good place that, we can do this and this is where we are. And, he loves the boys and he doesn't, I don't think he looks and thinks they should be doing this or they shouldn't be doing that. I think he appreciates, like I do, what they can do and what we thought they'd never be able to do.
Yes. And getting back to the book then, there's also some chapters on therapies and education, coping with stress. And also I noticed there's a great deal of useful websites and resources for people, which would be very useful. Well,
the idea is if a child is newly diagnosed, that you'd be, when my boys were diagnosed, there was nothing. Nobody gave you anything. There's a few leaflets here, or you can go online and look at this and go online and look at that. And you just don't know where to start. The idea that someone could just hand you one book with everything in it as a starter pack, but also as a starter to your emotions, because if you don't deal with your emotions, then how can you deal with all this other stuff? So it was just to wrap it around and make it easy. You can also dip in and out of the book. You don't have to read it from the beginning to the end. It's not... If you haven't read the first chapter, you wouldn't understand chapter 4. So if you've got a child with ADHD and that's your main problem, you might look at that bit first. Or if you couldn't decide on a therapy, you might go straight to the therapies. If your child was going through diagnosis and you thought they had autism but you didn't know how to start, you might read that chapter first. Or you could direct somebody close to you to read a certain chapter. If they don't understand you and you think you've got an issue, say read chapter 2. That's the emotions and what I'm going through. And if you can't tell anyone and they don't understand what you're going through, you could say, read chapter 2. This is how I feel.
Sure, yeah.
So it's meant to be that you can dip in and out, and it's all in sort of small paragraphs. So it's meant to be quite accessible and not the sort of school book.
Yes, okay. And how do people buy the book?
They can buy anywhere online. Amazon has got lots of reviews on Amazon. So if you want to have a review, have a look at a review, read it on there. But on Amazon, there's also a lot of other online places. You can get it to any bookshop anywhere in the world. I think some have gone to America. A friend got it in New Zealand. So any bookshop will be able to order it straight in the next day. But the great thing is that Waterstones now stock it.
Brilliant.
From about November, December. So every branch of Waterstones.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time now. And we've also got your website. Shall I give that to listeners, or would you like to?
Yeah, that's... Oh, okay. I've got a Facebook page of the book's name, A Parent's Guide to Coping with Autism, which is an open page, and I blog most days about the boys. Okay,
and we've also got a website, www.sarahjziegel, that's sarahjziegel.wordpress.com. Okay, Sarah, well, thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Thank you very much.
You're listening to Just Women on Brooklands Radio. You can join in by emailing any comments or questions you may have to justwomen@brooklandsradio.co.uk or check us out on Facebook. Search for Just Women at Brooklands Radio. Just Women is just what you need.